This episode is brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to learn more. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
This is Military Matters. One of the issues that we face in covering stories that show a darker side of the military is that critics use those stories to push a narrative that we're indicting all service members, or that we're attacking a certain group of service members, in particular, special operations. It seems like the moment you add SF or SOF to your job description, you become a lightning rod for all negative press, and I totally empathize and understand that lens. But here's the thing. I want you to understand, because it's critical to understanding the story you're about to hear. It's not about the unit the person in question was in, or his job, or the fact that he was in special forces. What's important here is that the spouse of a service member was under terrible duress, and little was done to help that person. The fact that the person was in fact a special forces soldier, if that rubs you the wrong way, substitute special forces for cook, admin, or intel guy. It really doesn't matter. Do we expect the very best of our SOF members? Absolutely. But we should have the same standard for behavior for any service member. No one in uniform should ever be exempt from the law or the scrutiny that comes when they are not treated appropriately. In this episode, Jack Murphy brings you the story of an abuse survivor. She's asked that we only use her first name for reasons that will become obvious as you listen to the story. We've also made the conscious decision to remove her ex-husband's name as well. The story is about her survival and how this situation was handled. Heads up, this episode contains descriptions of spousal abuse and animal abuse. Listener discretion is advised.
In this episode of Military Matters, I interview Celina, who is the spouse of a 7th Special Forces Group soldier. While he was in the Special Forces qualification course and then in 7th Group, Celina suffered a horrific level of abuse at the hands of her husband. I've spoken with Celina off and on over the years, and when she reached out to me recently, I went back into my files and I found the documents that she provided me, even a 3-page long, partially complete article that I wrote about her experiences. But I never published it. I could never finish it. Her story was just too horrible. It was the worst I'd ever heard, and I've covered a lot of sexual assault and domestic violence stories in the military over the years. Celina's abuse was overwhelming, even to me as a third party, as a writer. I always felt bad about that. I felt like I had let Celina down, and I hope I can fix that today. I have to warn you that what you will hear in this episode is disturbing, to say the least. You will hear accounts of domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, and violence against animals. I've covered combat, soldier suicides, murders, and sex assaults for a long time, and honestly, this is about as bad as it gets. However, Celina's story matters. It matters because the military still to this day has not properly grappled with the issue of sexual assault and domestic violence in its ranks. I get phone calls from victims all the time, just this week in fact. And it is incumbent on all of us to keep talking about this issue as long as those phone calls keep coming. So with that, we will jump right into the interview with Celina.
I'm Celina. I'm a mother of 3, 4 if you include fur babies. And I am now, after this in particular life experience, I am now an advocate and activist for domestic violence and in general, just I guess you say human rights, just the human right to feel and be safe. And that has been my new life's mission, as far as really looking to follow that path and help others so they don't have to go through some of the hurdles that my children and I experienced. We were married 2010.
And was he already in the military by that point?
No, he was not.
Okay.
At that time, he was in a delayed entry program for actually the Navy. He wanted to go into Navy special operations. And that eventually didn't pan out. And then he diverted his attention to the Army. At that point in time, we were probably together about 5 years, I would say.
Okay.
He then joined the delayed entry program for the Army.
And did he go straight into special forces, the training pipeline, or did he spend some time in the conventional military first?
He went directly into, I believe it was called an 18X-ray contract. He went directly with the special forces contract with the contingency that he completes all the requirements within the Q course and like the security clearance, different things like that.
So as he's going through this training pipeline, and you guys have one child already, how is your guys' relationship going?
I wasn't supposed to have children, and we went from having, and he was pretty adamant about not wanting children either. But I do feel like, it's my own personal opinion, but I do feel like once he realized a certain level of control that came with our daughter, we went from having one child to 3 children in 3 years. So by the time he joined the military, when he went into the military, I was pregnant with our last child, and we had a child in between. So we had 3 children when he went into the military.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Even that was the first time, too. When he joined the military and I was like, I had to go to North Carolina, it was the first time ever, not only was I away from my family, but it was the first time ever, I was the breadwinner up until that point. I was in my head trying to support all his dreams and thinking, oh, maybe if I can if he can feel like he's in a state of, quote unquote, making him feel like a man, then he won't be so hostile. This is the point where I'm like, okay, I'm slowly drifting from, okay, I'm no longer in that, but I love him type of phase of the DV. I'm into that, okay, this is getting scary. I now have 3 children. And I need to do something fast because it's intensifying and things are escalating. But I never once would have thought, like I said, but at this point, I'm still with my family, so it's not as bad. So it was still a lot. 3 kids in 3 years, it was a lot.
And so how did things progress once you got down to Fayetteville, North Carolina, down to Fort Bragg, and is going through the Q course?
The Q course was very interesting. I'll just say that, because that's when I would say things really start to get weird. Like it was a lot of mind games. It was a lot of mind games. It was a lot of things that I had a lot of strict rules that I had to keep because he said he didn't want me to F up his career. I already had the template of walking on eggshells, and then that was just intensified with knowing every little thing that I was doing that he felt was under watch, not only by the people that I would try to befriend. He was pretty prone to burning bridges everywhere he went, so he knew that we were really under scrutiny. I had to play this role really well to try to appear that everything was perfect. I do feel like the second best thing to him was abusing the animals, because then I'm standing in front of things for the animals now. And those are things that he knew that kind of would delay. I know, even though I got a lot of slack for that, I would try to get the animals out first and trying to convince someone that, hey, I think it's better suited that the children and I return to my family so you can focus on whatever you want to do, so you don't have to worry about us messing up your career. It was very, I think in my head, I was just, especially so having that DV brain, I was confused. I was in a state of confusion constantly because I'm like, he doesn't want us, but he doesn't want us to leave. So it was very confusing. And then the fact that things he felt that there were more stressors because the Q course is obviously a stressful course. I was just confused, a state of confusion most of the time. And I feel like with that, during this time, like I'm saying, with my animals being abused and everything, and he knew this was going to be something that was really going to be psychologically like controlling. To put things in perspective, my nickname growing up was Dr. Doolittle. And when he met me, I was a foster mom for the rat rescue. So he knew that these types of things put me in a different headspace.
That he could hurt the animals to punish you.
Yes. I knew he would threaten the animals, but it got to the point where the kids would start running like, Mama, you have to have the dog. You have to have the dog. And I'm like, what? And I run in there. And the dog looked like it's unconscious. Like at one point in time, I thought, okay, someone's going to see what's going on, because the MPs were called. One day I hemorrhaged. I had passed out and I woke up to the MPs pounding on the door because He never allowed me to bring the dog inside because he said I was treating it like a baby. And the neighbors called the MPs on us, and they were like, yeah, you're going to get like animal neglect, and where you wake up, and I guess they saw the state that I was in, like my color, my skin's gone, everything. So they were like, just blew it off. And I'm like, no, because they're like, oh, you're obviously not well. And I was like thinking, no, how could this happen? Because I thought that was going to be something like, okay, someone's going to start having a lens into our house. Someone's going to start watching. Someone's going to see that something's off. I feel like I was just enough in that I was believable, that I was never going to go anywhere, but just enough out that I remember like my mission was to get my children out safe.
When you say your children's safety, was he hurting the kids at this point as well?
At this point, it was only threatening to hurt the kids. But since at first it was like threatening to hurt the animals, and then it had already started escalating to hurting animals. And then he would just do little things too. If you don't do this, I'll do this. And he would always make good on them. And they would just slowly, gradually, and it was always like that. It was, and he was like, it don't matter how long it is. He would always have some level of payoff. So everything was very believable. And even at this point in time, I had reached out. Unfortunately, that was not a successful escape. I had quite a few failed escapes. Even the reason why the last time I absolutely told no one into 24 hours before. But safety planning is critical. And I remember thinking about how, like, people, there's no such thing really as just getting out. It's a process. And I feel like sometimes people lose sight of that. And also they put normal, healthy, I guess you say, behavior to things that's not normal and healthy. And because of that, even someone as trusted as an advocate has ruined one of my escapes and almost put us in extreme danger. And that was at Fort Bragg. So it was like every time something would fail, I would have to recalibrate, and it made things a lot more difficult for the next time.
So you had already gone to a victim's advocate while he was in the Q course, and
Correct.
Were like, I need to get out of this.
Yes. And unfortunately, the advocate, I'll just say the advocate did not heed my very specific instructions. And because I pretty much told her, like, any emails and different things like that's not secure. I was like, I would have to try to create a way of getting there in person, and then we'll see about things. I'm just want to learn the ropes of what I need to do to know how I need to strategize. I was like, this isn't beyond a plan. This is strategizing as far as readapting. It's like, this is not a linear plan. I have to adapt as I go. And so it's like they didn't really understand the in-depth nature, especially because I'm a pretty calm person. So sometimes I feel like sometimes people don't really understand the urgency behind things. But at the same time, I also know that I have been desensitized, because when I talk about things, because it was so insidious and I was desensitized, sometimes I still am surprised by other people's reactions.
Whether it's a domestic violence victim or a soldier in combat, sometimes the reactions are like to laugh, to get the stress out of you. There's a counterintuitive types of reactions that people have to things.
Yes, definitely. Because even I was like, it's so horrible. I'm a part of like a Tuesday support group. And like, honestly, I'm a lot of times like the comic relief, because that's how I deal with things. That's actually how I grew up. And so it's like sometimes I'm laughing at things and it's like people are looking at me like, what is wrong with this lady? But it's like, that's just how I grew up. And then part of me had to come to the understanding that this is not about me. There's nothing that I can do. And honestly, that day that I even came to that point, I'm like, Celina, what you doing with your life? What are you doing with your children's lives is the biggest thing.
I actually talked to another witness that you had put me in touch with, that during the Q course, your husband had taken a psychological evaluation that identified him as having some really profound sociopathic behaviors. From what he told you and what another witness told me as well,
Yeah.
He was actually actively bragging about how the psych evals showed him to be a sociopath.
Correct. Yeah, it was quite a few people there. And honestly, all I can think is only a sociopath would want to share that they're a sociopath.
Exactly.
I was just kind of horrified, though, because I was getting the news in real time as well. Like, I obviously it just confirmed a lot of things that was going on. And like I'm saying, I'm one of those people that don't like to use terms loosely, as far as especially growing up with a father who was in that line of work. So even if I said it, I would say, oh, he exhibits like sociopathic behavior. But I was like, okay, yeah, so I am right. So it actually helped me really adjust how I move things, because I tell people it's crazy until I got to a certain point. It was like he had emotional alchemy. Like he could adjust and almost like he was a different person. Like it would be very believable. Like I lived with two different individuals in this. And so it was very scary too, because that's what, like, I felt like it was messing with the moral compass of my children, but because it was no real consistency. Like I said, I was just living life with two people. And it was very scary that someone who not only is like, obviously is confirmation that's who he was, but exhibits some of the behaviors. Like by this time, which I'm not sure if you were in touch with that witness as well, but at this point in time, he was caught already torturing like Rat said, like at work and everything. So that's not like normal behavior, or shall I say, that's not healthy behavior. So it was like, I couldn't understand how all of these different things, there was so many other things. Like I was saying, he was burning bridges everywhere he went. And I couldn't understand how all of that went under the radar. Maybe we should check on a family. I heard he had a family. We went under the radar for 4 years. I couldn't understand how someone that like basically failed a psych evaluation, doing some horrible things at work, and they're like, oh, if this guy does these things in public, I wonder what he's doing behind closed doors. Not one person ever questioned that. Right. Like, he already had a wife and kids, but no one ever sees them.
And it's a huge red flag, obviously. Like you alluded to, what's that person doing behind closed doors? What is that person going to do in combat when he has a loaded weapon in a village in a remote part of the world? These are like huge red flags that these people shouldn't be in the force. Okay, he graduates from the Q course and gets assigned to 7th group, right?
Correct. Yes, and definitely things intensified there. There's a lot of abuse that happened. Right, I had emergency hysterectomy. Like I was saying previously, I had been hemorrhaging, and I was like, okay, I need to get this situated. I'm a liability to my children. So I had to get emergency hysterectomy. And then part of them was weird because he would talk about it like it was elective surgery. And I'm like, dude, I just turned 30 like a couple days ago. It was not elective, but I was not in a state to drive. It was a lot of repeated abuse that started to happen like a week after the hysterectomy. He forced us to drive from North Carolina to Florida. He was in a Penske. Like I said, by this point in time, I'll just say my internal stitches were completely ripped. I bled. I remember I was bleeding the whole time. I was sitting on some Food Lion bags, and I remember I had soaked my jeans, and it was a puddle of blood that I was sitting in. And then I kept begging to stop, and he wouldn't let me stop. And I remember seeing him look like he was dozing off in the Penske. So I was like, okay, this is my chance. And I remember I got off like some crazy sketchy rest stop. And then I see him do a full out U-turn, going head on for a moment to follow me into there. And I'm just, what do I do? I remember he just comes in, gets out, and what the are you doing? And everything. Because up until this point, he almost flipped the car multiple times with our children in it. And so I was like, I need to stop. And I remember he was really angry. Like he was getting ready to get nose to nose. We would always do that like right before like I get attacked. And then he smelled like me just sitting in hours of just stale blood basically, and just belittled me. And I remember just walking he was like, and he started fussing about me getting blood on the seat. And I'm like, no, I'm sitting on the grocery bags. And he was telling me, like, he's like, you're disgusting and everything, like, go change. And I just remember like people looking horrified. Like I'm saying, I'm soaked with blood. I'm just soaked. And I helped all these bloody grocery bags, and people are like, are you okay? And then he like starts to fuss at them, and then they just like back away. And I remember just going into the rest stop and like changing. I remember I left my clothes there. I was thinking, maybe if I move a little slower, like somebody get the license plates, or I'm gonna leave my clothes here, maybe somebody else. But none of that worked out as I thought. I changed my clothes, got some more bags set on them, and we had to pretty much was forced to finish driving that 10 straight hours to Florida. Hours prior, my head had been slammed into the stove. I had been briefly knocked unconscious because I was saying that, because I remember saying, I was like, I'm not going to drive. No, I'm not. I was like, what is my life worth $3,000 to you? Because I think that was about the price that he would have pocketed or whatever.
And after this ordeal, you did have to go to the hospital after what was it, like 4 or 5 days?
No, actually, he wouldn't let me go to the hospital. It was 6 months before I would not stop bleeding. I bled for 6 months until I had to get chemically cauterized to stop the bleeding because of the complications from the hysterectomy. But yeah, I bled for 6 months.
And meanwhile,
I went under the radar. I went to the doctor. The doctors knew about my internal stitches being ripped in Fort Bragg and on Eglin. And I thought, okay, great. Like this is going to be the time. But no.
If you're looking to make a career change or still trying to find your path outside the military, I recommend checking out Sabio, the coding bootcamp and developer community that's helped so many veterans become successful software engineers. Sabio teaches you the skills to start a real high-paying tech job in just 17 weeks, online and from the comfort of your own home. Visit sabio.la/military to learn how you can use your VA benefits to enroll. That's sabio.la/military.
You said you tried to warn them, or you tried to ask for help in a sense, and they just did not help you.
No, and I always feel like, oh my God, are you not going to read through the words? Because it was like on every military form, it says at the bottom, do you feel safe at home and everything? And it's what logical person you think want to answer these questions when someone's accompanied to their doctor's appointment?
And he would accompany you to every doctor's appointment.
And if he didn't, a lot of times he would just ask me, help me request my medical forms because he know that I would get the full script. It was like, I felt like it was like he would laugh and everything in a way like it was like no out. It felt like it was no out. And so I was thinking too, like even when something like as far as when he's at the visit, like when we're at Fort Bragg and they asked, have you had like sexual intercourse? And he answers for me, no. And I say, yes. Because obviously it's excruciating pain and you don't want intercourse after having the hysterectomy. I'll just say that. And I'm thinking that this will be a red flag. No. And my stitches are being ripped. Yes, I'm in extreme pain. Yes, I need your help, but I can't say I do. But I feel like at least these should have been red flag moments for them.
It's like someone throw me a life preserver here.
Yes. I actually suggested that when I was invited to be lend my voice towards the Military Family Protections Act. That was one thing that didn't go through, but I had suggested that there be like a safety pin when someone's requesting their medical records. So if I was to request my records, but I'm not requesting it with the proper pin, they know something is flagged. It's where I would get generic information or something where it wouldn't have my safety questions on there.
So you get down to a civilian housing outside of Eglin Air Force Base. Yes. And the isolation and the control continues to get ratcheted up on you.
Yes. By this time, he definitely had an eye out for our son for whatever. It was like his own personal vendetta. He's like, everything that our son did, it was like everything he did was just, it's like he couldn't do any right. And it was the psychological games, even with him, just was really horrible. I remember asking one time, I'm like, why are you doing it? Like, why are you even just looking at him with disgust one day? I'm like, why are you looking at him like that? It's your son. I'm like, and I was like, how could you just be so mean and evil? Like, I was like, he looks just like you too. I was like, he's like a miniature you, and that's what makes it easier.
And your son is like 3 at this time, 4.
When we first moved to Florida, he was 1.5. And yeah, he was 3, like he was like a couple months from 4 when we escaped.
Okay.
So it was like our son was terrified of him. It was the relationship with our daughters were very different from the relationship with our son. It was just very detached. And it's like he just felt like it should have been a different, like it was, I don't know, it was just weird. It was almost like a jealousy. Like I didn't understand it. Like I honestly just never had to deal with that type of personality type in my life. So I didn't understand it. But I do feel like even with the children in general, he would set up things like he would reward them to do things or to disrespect me and I would like, well, set up like just very manipulative things. And I was like, well, why are you doing that? He would weaponize them against me to be abusive and our son. And so I'd be like, why do you do that? That's not funny. And he was like, how else will I make sure they want to stay with me, the fun parent, if you ever try to leave? And he would just laugh about it. And a lot of things were set up like jokes. But it was the hard truth behind what he was doing was really scary. Like I said, that he was totally just really messing with the moral compass of our children. In particular, I like what he was refusing to get, but we have a daughter who has high functioning autism. And so she was already having a difficult time adjusting to regular emotions and everything from herself. And it was greater risk of her even being more prone to other things because of his behavior, and reinforcement was the biggest thing. So it was putting a strain on everyone's relationships, even within the children. He was creating a dynamic of just like hierarchies within a rank system of who's going to be his favorite child almost. And even he's actually said that before, like, what do you mean favorite children? There's no such thing. He's, oh, that's because you live in a fantasy world. But I honestly believe that it's not healthy to have favorite children. But I was just like, honestly, I was horrified to hear that. It was like everyone had to just fall into their role that he wanted us to be in. And so everything was controlled.
Right. The control. And this is classic, I think, abuser behavior. He deployed overseas and he made sure you didn't have power of attorney, that you didn't have access to the bank accounts, that like you literally were like, essentially your home was a prison, even with him away.
Yes. Yeah, I remember for a couple of days, which I definitely feel like this all falls into each other. Like 2 days before he deployed, because he ended up getting deployed sooner than he had thought. And so 2 days before he deployed, he murdered our German Shepherd. And then a day before he deployed, I had to get like a oral surgery that I was on like liquids for three weeks or whatever. And during that, he said, no, you just didn't remember. You told me to take all the cards. I'm like, no person in their right mind. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, he took all the cards, every single card except of a PayPal card that he like sporadically funded. And this makes no sense. Like, we have to eat. Like, you have a whole family here. Like, I can't wrap my mind around. I was like, and if something were to happen to you, we don't have access to anything. I don't have a power of attorney. Like, it was clear. And then I didn't even realize it till my daughter made me aware of it, but he would check in with her first to see what I was doing around the house. Or at least I'm guessing she let me know, but I'm guessing that's how he knew what's going on in the house. I remember he would be like, I heard you were doing this, or moving furniture. You need to put everything exactly where it needs to be. And I'm like, dude, like, this is the epitome of a control problem. You're thousands of miles away in a war zone and you're worried about where furniture has been placed. This is an issue. So it's, everything. He still wanted that control. Like, I never in my life knew that somebody even had that much phone access. It was like, he would call me just randomly, because he would do like weird things. Like, he would even with like sleep deprivation, or he just even like randomly drink this whole bottle of water. If you don't drink it, one of your kids going to drink it. Just things throughout the day. And so it was like he was no longer there to try to do that. And then like during this time, I was trying to be very delicate with things too, because I knew I was still really, now this is okay, game time, like how I'm going to do this. And it was like, this was during the time I started doing soul counseling. And on top of that, I felt like I had already gave him a little bit too much of knowing that I wanted out, because I remember he had said something like, this was like a day or two before the dog was murdered. He had said something along the lines of, if I tried to leave, no one would, he'll be deployed and I'll just look like a piece of wife who's leaving while he's deployed and emptying out the house, or all this crazy scenario. And all I can think is, oh my gosh, he's right. And no one would understand the horrors that we're living in. And then he would potentially punish the children if I'm not there, because he was like, oh, and then like he would say things like he knew that the children, like all I cared about. Like I'm saying, I knew that it was not about me getting out, it was about getting the kids out. When he knew that, that's when things became scary, because that's when they really became like weaponized. And so that's all I cared about. But every single turn, and that's what I'm saying. I think that's why he started using manipulation with the kids. Oh, how else I'm going to make sure that they're going to want to stay with the fun parent if you try to leave, things like that.
And meanwhile, while he was deployed with 7th Special Forces Group, he said his teammates came to understand that something wasn't right with this dude.
Oh yeah. Oh, beforehand he had already been trying to switch teams and stuff, and nobody wanted him. And he deployed, and while there, he had a stack of negative cancels. He had got into it with the team sergeant and the captain. And I think I shared with you the phone call that he was on where he belittled other soldiers for going on their first mission. And I was just sick to my stomach hearing, like, I remember telling him, like, dude, it's not just the honor of putting your life on a line. Taking a life is not an easy thing, or at least it shouldn't be like an easy thing to do in the realm of just being a healthy individual. And that honor is given that space too, because these are things that we are saying, hey, this is the honor, and this is what our nation needs to preserve what it is. And you are taking so much of what they just did and so much of what they're already going through, and you're like, it got to the point where he did tell me, he told me I was killing his vibe, and he hung up on me because he was like, I'm pumped, I'm ready to get back out there. And because at one point in time he was like, you hear that? And I'm like, what? It sounded like some people coughing in the background. They were throwing up because it's their first kill. And I was like, and he was like, these are some weak and I see hesitation, and you obviously don't want me back if you are siding with them, and you're supposed to be my wife. And I'm just like, what? Like, I was horrified. Yeah. I was like, and he was like, yeah, these are the type of people that have PTSD, go home and kill themselves. They might as well kill themselves now. And I'm just like, oh. And I was like, you're in the room with them? He's like, yes, they're not going to say anything in their weak. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Like, I'm saying, I come from a huge military family. I have some family I've seen the byproduct of what trauma can do in the war after someone's gone to war. And so I was horrified. Like, I couldn't believe, and I was, like I'm saying, I was surprised that no one said anything too. Like, and then what I'm saying, they came back with a lot of negative consoles, and he was kicked off the team upon his return. And then that was his first and only deployment. So that says a lot.
And what was the situation like when he came back from deployment for your family?
That's when things really, really hit. That's when it really had like legit, like direct threats. Like, he would, like, first I remember he would say, oh, if you try to leave, I'll kill you. And then I remember first order protection, some years past, I had put that he would always say that he would kill me. And so then he would do like almost ritual, like every single night. He's like, if you try to leave, what? And I would have to say, you'll kill me. And it would be so like nonchalant that it was just like no big deal. And then, but when he came back, it was like things had intensified. He was already angry because he said he thought we were going to be doing more fun stuff, him basically alluding to killing more people. And I thought we were going to do more fun stuff. And I had to learn through my children that he had collected basically trophies off all the bodies he had killed. And I had to learn through the kids.
He told the kids this, that he was taking like ears and fingers and stuff?
More or less he picked up like things like walkie-talkies.
Okay,
stuff. And so the kids were playing with these items that he brought back. And they let me know. They were like, look at Daddy got this off that body. And I'm like, what? I'm like, okay, maybe I heard something wrong. Then I confronted him about it. And he's yelling. And then again, oh, you just live in a fantasy world. They need to know this. They need to know how to. And I'm like, no.
Little kids.
And like I said, it just got worse. And then it got to the point where he would just flat out be like, if I help any type of push to anything he has to say, he's like, you know what? You talk to me like I wouldn't just kill you where you stand in front of a room full of people. And I'm like, okay. And he's, you're gonna make me your career. And I'm like, what? And so it's very hostile at this point. And it was like, I was like, I'm not ready for this. I don't even know what before. It's like, I can have some level of checks and balances of grasp of what I can do to pacify a certain like fit or whatever, like a fit of anger. until I can like devise something else. But by this point in time, I was terrified too, because I couldn't manage it as well as I felt like I would. And then also the clarity of understanding I was never managing anything realistically. It was like, there's no such thing as managing another person's emotions. And so I was just like, okay, like this is like a waiting game as far as like when I see an exit, I'm going to take it. And so all of this kind of, I guess you say, it just climaxed to one day we're on Postal Point, a beach at Eglin, and he tossed our son in the water. I remember this was like the first time that our son had ever was like, okay, he was not within arm's reach of me and everything. And I'm like, okay, part of me was nervous, but I'm like thinking, we're in a public place. He's not going to do anything to him in a public place. And we're on a military base. There's other people who he had already just said hi to, two other special forces guys and stuff. I'm like, oh, he should be fine. Like I said, he tossed him out of the canoe, and our son had a life vest, and he ended up falling on his stomach. So he's taking out a lot of water. And so I start to run in and everything. And I told our daughters, I'm like, don't move, stay here. And I left him on the beach side. And I'm running into the water trying to get to our son because he's screaming and taking in water. And you hear this, you just see the whole beach watching because my ex-husband, he's yelling. He's like, put your fucking head back, put your fucking head back. And everything telling him to put his head back. And I'm sitting there thinking, one, like my child just had a large head. And it was like, it's no way, like his little body's like bobbing. And I'm just like, he had the life vest on too. So it was like impossible for him to have that strength to flip and everything without having that understanding. And so our son is like scratching at like towards his arms and everything, so for him to help him out. And he's like pushing him. And I was like trying to calm our son down in the distance, like, it's okay, baby. It's okay, I'm coming. And then my ex-husband, he like pushes him, like, because our son is grabbing his arm and he like scratches him and he pushes him hard enough back that he is now on his back with the life vest. And I'm like, oh. And I was like, good, baby. I said, do the Mr. T. Because I taught them, that was one of the first things I taught them, or I was teaching them how to swim, just put your body out and just like float. And I see his body relax, and it's like he can hear my voice getting closer. And he just relaxes. And that angered my ex so much, to the point it was like he like, oh, like she has this control. And it made him so angry. And my daughter's still on the beach, and he's like, you're a horrible mom. Get back there with my daughters. Why would you leave them on the beach? And I'm just like, no, like he's just too close to our son. No. And so I'm getting closer in, and he's telling me to get back. He's telling me to keep getting back, and I'm not listening. And then he gets to the point where he palms his head, and he's getting back. And I don't. I keep going in there because I'm like, okay, I'm almost there. I'm only like maybe 6 feet away or so. And there's 2 special forces guys within 5 feet of him the whole time. He pumps his head underwater. And I remember I just freeze because I can see in his eyes, like I tell people, it's 2 different people. And I see in his eyes that if I don't do everything he tells me to do, he will kill my son. And everybody's seeing, the minute he pumped his head underwater, you hear the whole beach go, And I remember, like, honestly, everything I've ever been through my entire life, the worst moments of my life was seeing my son scream in terror underwater. And it's like, once my ex realized, like, he came to realize the whole beach was watching him, it's like he just let his hand go and my son bounced up because, like, you can see his chest, like, underwater, like, bobbing back and forth. Like, his body wants to come up, but my ex was keeping his head down. And it's like he just popped back up, and here, get him. He's been a little bitch. He's like, you all look ridiculous, because I have the dog, and my son's like about to choke me because he's so terrified and everything. And I was like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. Whenever I was like, I'm ready to go. And I didn't have, for whatever reason, I didn't have access to phone. And he always had keys and stuff. And I remember going to the beach because he's like, I'm not done yet. You go sit on the beach and actually be a mother and watch my kids. And no one would talk to me. I remember I was trying to call people like, hey, did you see that? Can you call the MPs? No one, not a soul. People literally turned the other direction, especially since those other 2 people saw him. Like, you're like, you just greeted him. And I know the people didn't get along with him because he's like, look at these guys. No one likes me. And then he goes, hey, like, what? Like, that sounds like that was pretty much the general intro of everyone. And it was like people, like, this was when we first even started getting glimpses. People started getting glimpses of us. We were never really like out. We never went to like military balls, nothing. And so
it's just easier for people to look away.
Yes. And honestly, I would say that was probably the deepest feeling of hopelessness that I had ever felt in a situation. I, it was to the point where it was, I was in I felt like it was like I had, for the first time ever, had got into an unhealthy place of, oh my gosh, it's me or him, it's me or him, it's the kids or him. Like, it was, I felt like so helpless. I was like, I've tried every single thing. No one wants to help us. Like, how can I save my children? Because all I can think is, if it was a couple seconds too late, my son would be dead and a whole beach would have watched it.
And this is when you started to plan your escape.
Yes, I did. I was like, okay, a day or two later, he was supposed to be going to sniper school, which I couldn't even wrap around my head how he even got accepted in sniper school after being kicked off.
He would have to pass. There's another huge battery of psychological exams you have to pass to go to sniper school.
Exactly. Oh, and that's what I'm saying. He was the one that had shared with the groups that it was two, and then conveniently, those two tests were lost during the trial or during the investigation to go to trial.
At Eglin Air Force Base, they just lost those psych exams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even when I was trying to subpoena those through just the family court, for added safety for the children, they mysteriously just disappeared.
Huh.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, it was just like I was just like, I don't know. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And so I was like, okay, he's going to be sniper school a day or two later. This is my chance. For whatever reason, he's like, I got whiff of it. And he went AWOL and he did a turnaround or whatever, from a Saturday to a Sunday. And I can't remember what excuse I used, but the house was in chaos because I was in the middle of escape. And so I remember I made up some BS, like, I'm not a great liar. And sure, like, it was like, I don't even know what I'm saying, so stupid. I'm pretty sure that he already knew that I was lying. Like, he knew that I was trying to escape. And just was really, he did some really horrible stuff. And I felt like he would always say to me, the dog, and our son, it's okay, I'm going to break you. I'm going to break you. Everyone has a breaking point. I just have to be systematic about it. It's all right. I'm going to break you. And those were things that those were things that I had to experience that weekend. And within that, I remember, like, I called the counselor, like, I had been sneaking off to for 6 months. And, like, luckily at this point in time, I was able to use the severely injured hip that I had to, like, go to these counselors and everything, because it was under the same, like, network type of thing. It was hidden under that veil. And then I would legitimately still go to these doctor's appointments because at the point in time, I needed a hip replacement. But I didn't obviously want to leave him with the kids. I just walked on it. But I remember just leaving this message I think he came in that Saturday and he left that Sunday, and I left all these voice messages. And then that Monday morning, like, the military life counselor called me and was like, yeah, you sound like you're telling me stuff that needs to be reported. And so he gave me the number. I called them that night, and they told me to come in person the following day. And that's where, like, the escape, the actual tangible steps to the safe out that we had started. Even that was just pretty much, honestly, a start of a whole nother chaotic journey. But yes, that's when we were able to actually, like, get some step. Like, I felt like I at least felt like I wasn't crazy anymore when I went into the office. I was like, okay, so these are not things that I'm just thinking, because it would always like, oh, you're too sensitive, you're overreacting, and I'm like, oh, maybe I am, or oh, you and your hippie ways, you don't understand this or you don't understand that, and I'm like, oh no, okay. But even with that counseling, I had already started pulling myself out of it, which I definitely feel like probably added to the hostility, because he realized I wasn't, in his head, as manageable, as I wasn't as malleable as he wanted me to be. And so that's when those spaces of escalation really happened.
But he did go back to sniper school. Yeah,
he just did a turnaround. He came to pretty much make sure I was in the house. He just did some horrible stuff, and then then when he went back, it was nuts, because it was like, that's when it was always, he called the next day like nothing, like, hey, what you doing? And I'm like, are you serious? And I'm like, so you just gonna act like nothing happened? And what are you talking about? And he would always do that. And we like, I'm not buying this, that you, like, then blacked out or something. This was something that was fairly normal. Like, he would act like he didn't even know what I was talking about. And if anyone didn't know him, they would, like, believe that he didn't know what I was talking about. Like, it was like, I don't know what you're talking about. That didn't happen.
And so you were able, with the assistance of the DAV, to put together an escape plan. And the bottom line is packed up the 3 kids in the minivan in the middle of the night and took off, right?
Yeah, I was able to. Okay, so we couldn't flag that I was trying to escape, especially because he had already drove that 10-hour trip.
Right.
And so, like I said, I had limited access, only had the PayPal card. And so what we did, because I wasn't in a state to really drive because of just some injuries and different things too, and just that long drive with 3 children. But at this point in time, like, I remember I was at a friend's house that was like Wednesday or Thursday, and the doctor called me and was like, hey, we have his danger risk assessment. And they're like, he has one of the highest scores that we get, and that pretty much paired with his skill level and the things that he has in the house, you have 24 hours to get out of the house. And I'm like, what? How am I supposed to do that? Like, with nothing. And so I was like, okay, I was like, okay, now this is a good time that I can now invite people into maybe assisting me without messing up escape. And so I called my dad, no questions asked. I was like, I need you here to drive us back to Arizona. And I need you here like as soon as possible. And so he flew out and he drove us 25 straight hours back to Arizona.
Wow.
And that was inside of a Camry. And I was only able to take a week's worth of clothes for each of the kids. And for whatever reason, I wasn't in my right state of mind, but I at least had the awareness. I brought 3 days of worth of clothes, 2 if you include the clothes I had on my body, and then 2 days worth of clothes. And I dumped the file cabinet into my bag. And that was, even though I only left with probably 10% of what I could have had, that helped out so much. I don't even know what made me do that, but I was so happy that I did.
File cabinet had what?
It had one, I was able to, even though they were like lost, the other 2 psych evaluations, I had a behavior test that showed that he exhibits psychopathic and sociopathic behavior. And that was an original test that was given by the military. So they couldn't say that they didn't know or anything like that. This was given by the military. This test was rated against the entire world. And this test had been utilized since the 1960s. So it was very, and on top of that, then I also had just a lot of different like emails and things that I didn't even realize that I had been like hiding. Like I'm saying, it's weird because it was like, I had a lot of repressed memories and I didn't even understand the whole state of that. I remember part of me was mad at my brain because like maybe I would have left sooner if I would have remembered all but it was just like I understood. I had to start being like a little kind to myself because I would have been a nervous wreck.
It's part of the trauma that your mind does that thing to protect yourself, to protect your consciousness. It blocks those things out. Yeah. I remember you telling me about some of the things that came out during your children's therapy, things they remembered that you didn't.
Yeah, and that was nuts. Like, even it was, like even just recent as like last year, still finding out things with my children in trauma therapy. Jesus. And I'm just like, it was terrifying because it's like part of me always kind of, what don't I know? If I remember some of these horrible things, what other things don't I remember? And then, like I was saying, and then it's just, I don't know, like my biggest thing is I'm just hoping that I can still I'll still be able to emotionally help keep a healthy emotional default for my children. So It's scary to know that it's like any point in time, because it's so much residual that's still there.
In this interview, we covered Celina's story up to her escape from her abuser. In part 2, we will discuss the fallout from this story, how Celina survived, how the Army mismanaged her case, and how we can hopefully move forward together to finally fix how the Army handles these issues. Until next time, I'm Jack Murphy. This is Military Matters.
Be sure to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter at StripesMMPod. And if you have a tip or story idea, shoot us an email at militarymatters@stripes.com. And don't forget, you can get 50% off your digital subscription to Stars and Stripes today. Just use promo code PODCAST and get 50% off your digital subscription. That's promo code PODCAST. This episode is brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to learn more. Thank you for listening. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And we'll see you at the next episode. This episode is brought to you by Sabio, the #1 coding bootcamp for veterans. Visit sabio.la/military to to learn more. Thank you for listening. I'm Rod Rodriguez,
I'm Jack Murphy.
and we'll see you at the next episode.